Well, hey there, friendships. Welcome back to Curtis's Corner. If you're new here, hi, I'm Curtis, and this is my corner, where we dive deep into all things creepy, kooky, and downright terrifying. Welcome to Movie Monday, and get ready, because this is part 2 of our spine-tingling 5-part series on the history of horror. If you missed part 1, make sure to check it out, but trust me, you will not want to miss this next chapter. In today's episode, we're jumping into the golden age of horror, from 1973 to 1982. A decade where the genre truly evolved and became even more chilling than ever before. Think of The Exorcist, Halloween, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Thing. This was the era that defined modern horror, with films that scared audiences to their core and changed the game forever. We're talking all the blood, the gore, and the unforgettable characters that left a permanent mark on horror history. So grab your popcorn, prepare to hide behind your couch, and let's uncover the terrifying films that made this era legendary. Before we dive in, make sure to give this video a like if you're ready for some major scares. Hit that subscribe button for more weekly thrills, and ring that notification bell so you won't miss a single scream. And hey, if you want early access to my videos and a say in what I cover next, check out my Patreon. Just $2 gets you all of that and more. Alright, let's get spooky and dive into part 2 of this history lesson you won't soon forget. Let's first talk about The Exorcist from 1973. The movie that didn't just scare audiences, it possessed them. It completely changed horror forever. This 1973 masterpiece wasn't your average spooky flick. For starters, director William Friedkin made it the first horror film that managed to bring a serious sense of realism to the genre. The story of Regan, a sweet little girl who ends up possessed by a demon, wasn't just jump scares and creepy music. The Exorcist was able to get under your skin with shocking themes about morality and faith. The way it blended everyday life with pure, unholy terror was next level. Now add in groundbreaking practical effects, from Regan levitating off of her bed to her spinning head, and the chilling story of good versus evil, and you get a film that managed to make audiences faint, vomit, and even run out of the theaters. It was a cultural event that scored 10 Oscar nominations and was able to cement itself as a true cinematic legend. But The Exorcist didn't just scare the pants off of audiences. It inspired a legion of films. Think The Omen from 76, The Amityville Horror from 79, and even more modern movies like The Conjuring from 2013. And let's not forget the wave of exorcism films that followed suit. The Exorcism of Emily Rose from 2005, The Last Exorcism from 2010, and The Pope's Exorcist from 2023. They owe everything to this devilish classic. So why does The Exorcist still matter today? Because it's the movie that proved horror can be more than just cheap thrills. It can challenge you, disturb you, and leave you sleeping with a Bible under your pillow. It's the granddaddy of modern horror, and its influence is everywhere. So the next time that you hear an eerie chant or feel a sudden chill, remember, The Exorcist is why we still love to be scared. Now, let's rev up the chainsaw and dive right in to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. A horror movie that is so terrifying, it didn't just scare audiences, it scarred them. This 1974 masterpiece by Tobe Hooper wasn't just another spooky film. It was a raw, gritty, and chaotic plunge into pure nightmare fuel. The film follows a group of teens who stumble upon a backwoods house of horrors, complete with a family of cannibals, bone-filled decor, and one chainsaw-wielding maniac named Leatherface. So, what exactly made this film so effective? Well, simply put, it felt real. It was shot with a documentary-style level of grit, which made it look and sound like something you weren't supposed to see, like you accidentally found a cursed VHS tape that might haunt you forever. Yes, I said VHS. Here's where things get really interesting though. Despite its bloody reputation, the film doesn't actually show as much gore as you think. Most of the violence is implied, relying on sound effects, frantic camera cuts, and your imagination to fill in the horrifying blanks. Now combine that with the relentless heat of Texas depicted by the filter used on the film, the unsettling hum of a chainsaw, and the chaos of that dinner scene. You've got a movie that grips you in a vice of dread and refuses to let go. It's a perfect storm of low-budget brilliance and primal terror that tapped into a generation's fears about isolation, helplessness, and the monstrous unknown lurking just off the highway. Now here's the part that defines it all. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre didn't just shock audiences, it changed horror forever. Leatherface's hulking and silent menace became the blueprint for slasher villains like Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, and even Ghostface. Movies like Halloween in '78 and Friday the 13th from 1980 borrowed this slasher formula, while films like The Hills Have Eyes from 1977 and The Devil's Rejects from 2005 kept the twisted family dynamic alive. Even modern gems like Hereditary from 2018 and X from 2022 carry its DNA with their slow burn dread, rural settings, and shocking finales. And let's not forget, it launched a wave of remakes, with the brutal Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2003, which brought Leatherface to a whole new generation. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is more than just a horror film. It's basically a rite of passage for every horror fan. It took a chainsaw to the rules of filmmaking and showed you that you don't need big budgets or fancy effects to make something truly terrifying. All you need is a mask made of human skin, a roaring chainsaw, and a whole lot of guts. Literally. Now it's time to cozy up by the fire and talk about the 1974 classic, Black Christmas, the film that turned Silent Night into a scream-filled nightmare. A few short years before Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees stalked their victims, Black Christmas brought terror to the holidays, and while Psycho from 1960 invented the concept of slashers, Black Christmas practically invented the slasher genre as we know it today. Directed by Bob Clark, Black Christmas is about a group of sorority sisters being harassed by terrifying phone calls, and one by one, they start disappearing. But what exactly makes this film so legendary? Well, it's not just the gruesome ways people are killed or the creepy atmosphere. It's the way it told its story. For starters, Black Christmas gave us one of the first ever glimpses of horror through the killer's perspective, initially shown in the first giallo film, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage of 1970. You're shown all the character deaths through the point of view of Billy, as he sneaks his way through the sorority house. And speaking of Billy, you never actually see him in the entire film's runtime. His identity is never revealed, and the spine-chilling final scenes leaves you wondering if the killer is still lurking around the house or not. It's that kind of ambiguous, psychological terror that made this film way ahead of its time.
But wait! There's more!
The movie also gave us a strong final girl in Jess, who wasn't just running around screaming. She had depth, independence, and some bold choices which were shocking and groundbreaking in 1974. And the vibe of the film? Twinkling Christmas lights, creepy carols, and snow-covered streets, mixed with gruesome murders. It's the perfect contrast of merry and macabre that keeps you on edge. Black Christmas didn't just scare the holiday cheer out of audiences, it inspired an avalanche of horror classics. John Carpenter's Halloween from '78 borrowed heavily from its playbook, which paved way for other slashers like Friday the 13th, Prom Night from 1980, and even Silent Night, Deadly Night from '84. Even modern films like Scream, You're Next from 2011 carry its DNA with their clever twists on the stalker in the house formula. It also spawned two remakes, Black Xmas from 2006 and Black Christmas from 2019. But let's be real, nothing beats the original. The 2006 remake of Black Christmas received mixed reviews, with many critics disappointed by its shift toward graphic violence and more explicit backstory for the killer, which detracted from the suspense of the original. Now, while some fans appreciate its campy, gory style, it's generally considered a lesser follow-up that doesn't quite capture the eerie psychological tension of the 1974 classic. As for the 2019 Black Christmas remake, it received largely negative reviews from critics, with many citing its heavy-handed social commentary and complete departure from the slasher genre typical formula. While some appreciated the film's feminist themes and its attempt to modernize the story, others felt it sacrificed suspense and horror for preachiness, resulting in a film that was more politically charged rather than scary. Back in part 1, we touched on the cultural earthquake that was Jaws, but let's dive a little bit deeper. Just be careful, because the water's not safe. Steven Spielberg's blockbuster masterpiece didn't just redefine suspense, it made sharks, and nature itself, our ultimate villains. Before Jaws, animals weren't the stars of horror, but this movie changed everything. With a pulse-pounding score by John Williams and the now infamous shark point-of-view shots, Spielberg turned a mechanical shark's malfunctions into a suspense-building genius move. By keeping the beast hidden, Jaws proved that what you don't see is even scarier than what you do. Its massive success made audiences terrified to dip a toe in the ocean and spawned a whole wave, pun intended, of nature-driven horror. Think Piranha from 78, Grizzly from 76, Lake Placid from 99, and even The Meg from 2018. They all owe their existence to Jaws. It's also the OG summer blockbuster, showing studios how to make movies big. So next time you hear that iconic, remember, Jaws didn't just make animals scary, it made fear a summer tradition. Well, horror fans, if you think you can trust people around you, think again. Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978 isn't just one of the best horror remakes ever. It's a full-blown psychological nightmare and spawned the trend of remakes as a whole. This film took the creeping dread of the 1956 original and reshaped it for a disillusioned post-Watergate world, where trust was in short supply. The terrifying premise? Well, strange alien pods arrive on Earth, silently replacing people with eerie, emotionless clones. And as our heroes desperately fight to stay human, the fear seeps into every frame. Thanks to Philip Kaufman's unnerving direction, grotesque practical effects, and one of the most haunting final shots in horror history. Pure nightmare fuel. Beyond scaring the life out of audiences, Body Snatchers cemented itself as a sci-fi horror powerhouse, influencing everything from The Thing from 82, They Live from 88, to The Faculty in 98, and Us in 2019. It redefined paranoia-driven storytelling, showing how horror doesn't always come from monsters. It can come from the horrifying thought of losing your own identity. The film's eerie sound design and unsettlingly subtle transformations make you question everything, and its bleak, gut-punch ending leaves you wondering, what if the invasion has already begun? This movie didn't just make aliens scary, it made people scary. With its chilling themes of conformity and mistrust, it feels just as relevant today as it did in the 70s. Do you love horror films from the 70s and 80s? The gritty ones with terrifying killers, shaky cameras, and way too much fog? Introducing the Fear Finder, the only app that lets you track every scream, every jump scare, and every awkwardly placed disco soundtrack. With Fear Finder, you'll know exactly when to scream, when to cringe, and when to laugh at the terrible editing. It's completely free, because it doesn't actually exist. But when it does, you'll never watch horror the same way ever again. Sign up now. Just, ignore the glitchy interface. Now let's take a trip back to 1978, the year horror was never the same again. Halloween wasn't just another scary movie, it was the movie that redefined fear. Before this, horror had its fair share of monsters, madmen, and mayhem, but John Carpenter's indie masterpiece perfected the formula, creating the blueprint for the modern slasher film and popularizing it. Masked unstoppable killer? Check. Group of unsuspecting teens? Check. Final girl who fights back? Oh, you bet. But here's what made Halloween so terrifying. It wasn't just about blood and gore. It was about the atmosphere. The long, creeping tracking shots. The shadowy figure lurking in the distance. The eerie stillness before an attack. Carpenter built tension like nobody else. And then there's that legendary score. 3 simple piano notes that instantly make your heart race. Yeah, you know the one. The moment you hear it, you just feel like Michael Myers is watching from the darkness. And speaking of Michael Myers, this guy is the ultimate boogeyman. With his blank, emotionless mask and slow, methodical movements, he became the scariest force in horror history. Unlike other killers, he wasn't driven by revenge or a tragic backstory. He was just pure evil, an unstoppable force of nature that couldn't be reasoned with. Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie Strode, on the other hand, gave us the final girl of all final girls. She wasn't the party girl, she wasn't looking for any trouble, she was just an ordinary babysitter in the wrong place at the wrong time. And yet, she fought back, proving that horror heroines could be smart, resourceful, and strong. This final girl trope became a staple of slasher films, inspiring characters like Nancy in A Nightmare on Elm Street from 84 and Sydney in Scream from 96. But Halloween didn't just create an icon, It changed everything. Without it, we wouldn't have Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, or even modern hits like Terrifier from 2016. The Masked Silent Killer, the slow, suspenseful build-up, the indie horror success story, it all started here. And even after decades of sequels and remakes, nothing quite matches the eerie, creeping dread of the original. The following year, we get Alien from 1979, which isn't just a sci-fi horror classic, it's a full-on nightmare in zero gravity. Before this movie, space was all about adventure, exploration, and epic battles between good and evil, but Ridley Scott had a different idea. What if space wasn't wondrous, but terrifying? Enter Alien, a film that turned the final frontier into a claustrophobic death trap, proving that in space, no one can hear you scream. The story follows the crew of the Nostromo, who respond to a mysterious distress signal and unknowingly bring something horrifying on board. What starts as a routine mission quickly spirals into pure terror as a relentless extraterrestrial predator begins hunting them one by one. And let's talk about that chestburster scene. Audiences in 1979 were not ready, and honestly, neither are the first-time viewers today. That moment cemented Alien as one of the most shocking horror films ever made. Here's a fun fact for you. Even the cast on the scene did not know that the chestburster would happen, and their reactions when it did are completely genuine and real. Alien completely reshaped both sci-fi and horror. The film's atmosphere is dripping with tension, using dark corridors, eerie silence, and slow, creeping dread instead of cheap jump scares. H.R. Giger's design for the xenomorph made it the most nightmarish creature ever put on screen. Part machine, part nightmare, and 100% designed to kill. Unlike other movie monsters, this thing wasn't just scary, it was perfect. No eyes, no mercy, just pure instinct waiting in the shadows. The film also introduced a new kind of horror villain, the android with a hidden agenda. He's part of a cold, corporate conspiracy that values the alien's survival over the human crew. The idea that the real threat isn't just the monster, but also the people in charge? Yeah, that paranoia still hits hard today. Let's not also forget the biggest game changer, Ellen Ripley. Played by the phenomenal Sigourney Weaver, Ripley wasn't your typical horror heroine. She was smart, tough, and refused to go down without a fight, setting the standard for every sci-fi action hero that followed. Before Alien, women in horror were usually screaming victims, but Ripley changed everything. Her battle against the xenomorph wasn't just about survival, it was about resilience, proving that the strongest character in the film didn't need to be the biggest or the toughest, just the smartest. She paved way for action heroines like Sarah Connor in The Terminator from '84, Alice in Resident Evil from 2002, and even Furiosa in Mad Max Fury Road from 2015. And if you're wondering why Ripley is still one of the greatest protagonists of all time, just watch that final showdown in the escape pod. Absolute legend. But Alien's impact doesn't stop there. This movie launched an entire genre of sci-fi horror, inspiring classics like The Thing, Predator from '87, Event Horizon from '97, and even modern hits like The Descent from 2005 and Life from 2017. And of course, it gave birth to one of the greatest sequels ever made, James Cameron's Aliens 1986, which took the terror of the first film and turned it into all-out war. More than 40 years later, Alien still remains a masterpiece of suspense, horror, and jaw-dropping creature design. It's the reason we still fear dark hallways, flickering motion trackers, and strange noises in the vents. Alright now, let's check in to the Overlook Hotel, where the walls breathe, the ghosts whisper. Insanity is strictly optional. The Shining from 1980 isn't just one of the greatest horror films ever made, it's an experience. A slow, burning torment that gets under your skin and stays there. Directed by the legendary Stanley Kubrick and loosely based on Stephen King's novel, this film follows Jack Torrance, played by the unhinged Jack Nicholson, a struggling writer who takes his family to the isolated Overlook Hotel for the winter. But as the snow falls and the walls start closing in, something sinister awakens inside Jack, and soon his loving wife Wendy and psychic son Danny realize that their biggest threat isn't just the ghosts lurking in the hallways. It's him. With its chilling atmosphere, cryptic imagery, and a descent into madness so intense you can feel it. The Shining cemented itself as one of the most psychologically disturbing horror films of all time. Now, it's not just the ghosts, or the blood-drenched visions, or even the creepy twin girls that makes The Shining so unforgettable. It's Kubrick's methodical, almost hypnotic filmmaking. He used long, eerie Steadicam shots that glide through the Overlook's endless halls, making us feel like we're trapped inside with the Torrance family. The symmetrical, dreamlike visuals make everything feel off, as if the hotel itself is alive. Then there's the unsettling score, full of droning, echoing sounds that make you feel like you're losing your mind right alongside Jack. And speaking of Jack, his slow, chilling transformation from struggling writer to axe-wielding madman is legendary. The grin, terrifying. That "here's Johnny" moment, instant horror history. Every frame of The Shining oozes dread, making it a film you never quite recover from. And the influence? Whew! Without The Shining, we might not have had modern psychological horror masterpieces like Hereditary from 2018, The Babadook from 2014, or even Black Swan from 2010, all of which embrace slow-building terror and mental unraveling. Haunted house horror? Well, you get The Others from 2001 and Dr. Sleep from 2019, the long-awaited sequel to The Shining, directed by Mike Flanagan of horror projects such as The Haunting of Hill House, Gerald's Game, and Hush. They all follow in its eerie footsteps. Even filmmakers like Ari Aster, who made Midsommar and Hereditary, and the aforementioned Flanagan have borrowed from Kubrick's dreamlike horror style. And let's not forget its massive impact on pop culture. The Simpsons, Ready Player One, and Stranger Things have all paid tribute to its most terrifying moments. Even if you've never seen the movie, you know the carpet pattern, the bloody elevators, and the words "Red Rum" scrawled on the door. Over 40 years later, The Shining remains one of the most unsettling horror films ever made, proving that the scariest thing isn't a monster in the dark, it's the slow, creeping realization that something is very, very wrong. Now, it's time to grab your backpacks and stick to the road, because we're heading straight into one of the greatest werewolf films ever made, An American Werewolf in London, from 1981. This isn't your grandpa's werewolf movie. No. See, director John Landis took the classic monster movie formula, injected it with razor-sharp humor, and then unleashed some of the most terrifying practical effects ever put on screen at the time. The story follows two American backpackers, David and Jack, who ignore some very ominous warnings and wander off the road into the foggy English moors. Big mistake, because then they're attacked by a vicious beast, leaving Jack dead and David slowly realizing he's been cursed to become a werewolf under the next full moon. Now what follows next is a gruesome, hilarious, and totally unforgettable descent into madness, complete with ghostly warnings, nightmarish hallucinations, and one of the most horrifying transformation scenes in horror history. Seriously, that scene alone changed horror forever. So, let's talk about that legendary transformation, shall we? Before An American Werewolf in London, werewolf transformations were usually done with simple crossfades or quick cuts, but not here. Oh, no. Thanks to makeup effects wizard Rick Baker, we get a full, agonizing, real-time sequence of bones stretching, skin twisting, and David's entire body morphing into a snarling beast. Every snap, crack, and scream hurts to watch. And it was so groundbreaking that it won the first ever Academy Award for Best Makeup. But this movie didn't just impress with its gore. It also delivered hilarious, dark comedy. David is haunted by the decaying ghost of his best friend Jack, who cheerfully encourages him to kill himself before he turns into a monster. It's the perfect mix of terrifying horror and twisted humor that made the film stand out from every werewolf movie before it. And let's talk about the influence. Without An American Werewolf in London, we wouldn't have some of the greatest horror films that followed. It inspired other werewolf classics with insane practical effects, such as Ginger Snaps from 2000, Dog Soldiers from 2002, and even The Wolfman in 2010. But the film's biggest impact wasn't just on werewolf movies. It revolutionized horror comedy. Movies like The Evil Dead 2 from 87, Shaun of the Dead from 2004, and Tucker and Dale vs. Evil from 2010 all followed its genius formula of balancing real terror with twisted humor. And let's not forget its influence on practical effects heavy films like The Thing, The Fly, Pan's Labyrinth. It proved that practical effects weren't just cool, they could be absolutely horrifying. Even after more than 40 years, An American Werewolf in London still stands as the definitive werewolf movie. The effects are unmatched, the horror is brutal, the comedy is dark, and sometimes hilarious. It's a film that refuses to be forgotten, just like David's Curse. It lingers in your mind long after it's done. Alright, for our final film we're talking about today, you must grab your 3D glasses and watch your back, because Friday the 13th Part 3 isn't just another slasher sequel. It's the movie that forever changed some of the horror we see today. By 1982, Jason Voorhees had already hacked his way into our nightmares, but this was the film that gave him his most terrifying weapon yet. Not a machete, but a hockey mask. That's right, before part 3, Jason was running around with a burlap sack over his head. But thanks to one unlucky victim, he finds that now iconic mask, puts it on, and boom, horror history is made. From that moment on, Jason transformed from just another crazed killer into a full-blown legend, a towering, unstoppable force of terror who would go on to define the slasher genre for decades. But that's not all this movie brought to the table. With bigger kills, bloodier effects, and gimmicky but ridiculously fun 3D effects, Friday the 13th Part 3 wasn't just about body counts, it was about bringing the horror right into the audience's face. So, let's talk about that sweet, sweet 3D madness, shall we? The 80s were obsessed with 3D, and horror wasn't about to miss out. This movie went all in on cheesy but fun visual tricks. Harpoon guns flying straight at you, eyeballs popping out of skulls, even a yo-yo being dramatically dangled toward the camera. Was it a little goofy? Absolutely. Did audiences love it? You bet. The film's 3D gimmick helped it slash its way to box office success, proving that horror fans were more than happy to literally have the scares jump right at them. But it wasn't just about flashy effects. This movie also helped solidify the rules of the slasher genre. The cast? A group of teens looking for a weekend of fun. Bad idea. The villain? A silent, relentless killer who never stops. Worse idea. And the final girl? Chris Higgins, who actually manages to fight back against Jason in one of the most intense showdowns of the series. This film, however, for me, personally didn't hold a lot of merit, as the character of Chris herself isn't really developed all that well, and when it's actually time for her to have that ultimate showdown, you almost forget she was part of the film in the first place. But, bringing it back, of course, a horror movie this influential doesn't just disappear. It leaves a massive, bloody trail behind it. The impact of Friday the 13th Part 3 can be seen literally everywhere. First, there's the mask, one of the most famous symbols in horror history. Without this movie, we wouldn't have the Jason Voorhees we all know and fear. It also helped push the trend of 3D horror, paving the way for films like Jaws 3D in '83, Amityville 3D in '83, and later hits like My Bloody Valentine 3D in 2009. And let's not forget the way it perfected the slasher formula. Its influences all over A Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play, and even Scream, which would later poke fun at the exact tropes Part 3 helped establish. The movie also inspired horror to go bigger, bloodier, and bolder, proving that fans loved their kills creative and their killers unstoppable. And Jason himself? He was more of a threat in this film, and brought a great mixture of creepiness and humor to the film as well. So at the end of the day, Friday the 13th Part 3 isn't just another slasher sequel. It's one of the most important horror films ever made. It gave us the hockey mask, revolutionized 3D horror, and helped define what a true slasher should be. And whether you love it for its gory kills, cheesy effects, or just the fact that it made Jason an icon, there's no denying its place in horror history. Well, 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 fiends. We've barely scratched the surface of our horror journey, and already the darkness is closing in. From the monsters of yesteryear to the nightmares that will haunt your dreams forever, Part 2 was just the beginning. But don't get too comfortable. The 80s gave birth to a whole new kind of terror, one that'll have you looking over your shoulder for years to come. The next chapter? Oh, it's got everything. Think razor-sharp killers, toys that really don't play nice, and a town where everyone's a little too awake in their nightmares. You didn't think it was over, did you? Stay tuned for Part 3. It'll leave you asking, who is really in control? Like this video if you want more chills sent straight to your soul. Subscribe if you want in on the next nightmare, and ring that bell because the horror is far from over and you're gonna need to be ready. And remember, what we'll uncover next, it's not who you think it is. In fact, it might just be standing right behind you. You better be ready because the rules are about to change.